Hey guys, it's Steve from The Checkpoint, and this is an introduction to Feist, or Feist, or however it's pronounced. It's essentially a 2D platformer and the first title from the talents over at Bits and Beasts, a small indie developer, while also being published by Finji, who worked on games such as Cannabolt and Capsule. Feist is set in a sprawling, enchanted forest, and the one key word you'll see thrown around when talking about this game is survival. And I don't mean that in the Terraria way, or the Minecraft way. I mean that in such a sense that everything in this forest is looking to murder you. But first, let's talk about the forest itself. Now obviously on first glance, you're going to notice that the art style of the game is silhouetted, it's limbo-esque, it puts focus on the creatures within the forest, and it's really effective in providing a clean and concentrated aesthetic. If you think about the forest, all you have, is different elements and varieties of colour. So, the leaves, the fauna, the canopy, the plants. So while playing something in a forest that requires such pinpoint precision and timing like a 2D platformer, the colours and objects and plants and trees and everything, they could clash together. And since there's no real way of providing depth of field in a 2D platformer, it could make it very difficult to distinguish between the level and the background, so the silhouette aesthetic is very much welcomed. However, occasionally you'll be thrown off by the fact that some enemies blend into the level far too much, and this isn't helped by the fact that almost everything is pitch black, making it harder to distinguish between, spiky centipede death monster and the platform you're trying to reach. The controls are simplistic, with X and C used for attacks and grabbing items, while the directional buttons in the form of up and left and right are used to jump and walk respectively. The Steam page for this game, interestingly, actually says it's recommended to play with a controller, but I found no sudden urges to hook up my Xbox controller or any other peripheral, because I think that, in my opinion, I believe that platformers are meant to be played as simplistically and casually as possible. I mean, they were among the first games ever produced, so I believe that platformers are just meant to be played casually, so the inclusion of wires and other such peripherals for your legs to get tangled in and your arms to get all wired up in is just unwelcome, because what's the point of playing a platformer which only requires, one or two directions and maybe a couple of other buttons for attacking and picking stuff up? What's the point of going out and hooking up a controller for that? I'm not sure I understand why it, requires or recommends even that a controller is used when it's so simple to play with a mouse and keyboard. And the mouse isn't even used, so just a keyboard. And the physics engine of the game makes for some cool little puzzle elements and makes a nice break from the constant running of the game. This is absolutely not a, Mirror's Edge style running simulator where you can just hold down one button and get through the level from A to B in one go. It requires a bit of thinking, it requires you to slow down, stop, and just think about what you're doing, for smaller puzzles or obstructions. And there's no way you could just run straight through a level. And I really like that, because it gives you a different spin on the platformer genre, but keeps it rooted. The soundtrack is really atmospheric, but at the same time it can get sort of grinding in a way. I mean, I love the analog style digitalized sounds, but despite this brilliance, the downfall is that to achieve this sort of sound, the music has to be bit crushed and compressed and have all these effects thrown onto it. And while it sounds really good and it kind of fits the aesthetic and the atmosphere of the game, the looping of the same crushed sound effects can get rather irritable. Now, I found the distinctiveness between the soundtrack and the sound effects of the game were really awesome, and it still feels satisfying to hear, leaves being crushed or branches snapping, just above the soundtrack, just at a level where you can really feel satisfied by that little snapping sound effect or other sounds of brambles and leaves and plants. And it really gives it a focus on the natural side of the game, which I believe is what a lot of the turn of this game comes from, considering it's based on survival and evolution in a way. And I think that the sound effects give it a more focused, concentration on the nature side of the game. One other slight annoyance I found is the camera. Now, this is definitely my biggest problem with the game, and there aren't many, trust me, but most of the game, or what I've played so far, involves running and tumbling downhill. Now, while this is a pleasant feeling in terms of momentum and speed and velocity and whatnot, the camera sort of remains stationary while our cute little fuzzball of a playable character almost leaves the frame, almost leaves the shot. And this can be annoying as there's no way of telling what's coming next. I mean, for all I know, there could be a spike pit or a lake full of crocodiles or a spike pit in the middle of a lake full of crocodiles, and I wouldn't be able to tell before it was too late because the player is so far to the right of the screen, and it's really difficult to tell what's coming up next. I think the camera could be adjusted to be slightly less zoomed in, or, you know, perhaps maybe even the integration of an option to zoom out ever so slightly, maybe through a view slider, but I just think it needs that little bit more, you know, it just needs to be zoomed out a little bit more, just enough so I can see what's going on. But overall, Feist is an excellent little game and it will keep you entertained for hours on end. The puzzle elements are infectious, the movement and physics feel excellent, and it all comes together to make a wonderful little indie platformer package that is definitely one to consider if you're looking for something atmospheric and thought-provoking. Thanks for watching, guys. Pick up the game on Steam in the description or the top left of the screen, and I'll talk to you very soon.